We had another column this week, one from Scott Birkin. His column this week was more thought-provoking to me than you might think at first glance. And his column asked the question, are engineers more creative than designers, or are designers more creative than engineers? So basically pitting engineers and designers against each other when it comes to creativity. And his article goes on, and the answer is, well, sometimes. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. Birkin points out that we all likely know some engineers who are very creative and some who are not. We also know some designers who are very creative and some who are not. And it isn't just the individual designer or engineer. It can also be the context, the challenge that each is presented with. And his article is all based really about engineers and designers and kind of this, and if you've ever worked in this environment, you know what I'm talking about. So the pat answer is, well, designers are the creative ones. They design it. They come up with all the bright ideas, and the engineers, well, they just implement it.
Right.
They just implement the designs, but it's really a lot more complicated about that. He goes on to make his argument. He points out kind of the common characteristics of both. So for instance, both designers and engineers have a passion for aesthetics. And aesthetics, by the way, aren't necessarily just what it looks like, but sometimes there's the aesthetics of how it works. Something that's not, there's pretty designs, not visually pretty, but just slick in the way the problem has been solved, right? So there's kind of aesthetic problem solving. Both designers and engineers have a preference for control. They have both have a reverence and arrogance for idea purity, that there is a right way to do certain things. Engineers for certain, but designers are as well. It's like, they design something, well, can't we do it this way? No, that's just not a good design, I mean, so this idea is kind of common between both of them, and also, a desire to make great things that help people. So it's a good article, and if you're an engineer or designer, you will most likely find yourself nodding your head at this. But to me, and why this kind of caught my attention, this idea goes deeper than engineers or designers. When you look at anybody on your team, do you pigeonhole them? Are you pigeonholing them? Well, she's a great salesperson, but could she possibly know about design? Right. I mean, she's a salesperson. She's not a designer. She doesn't know anything about design. Or maybe, Bob's a great machinist, but he doesn't have an engineering degree, so, he's just a machinist. What could he know? There's a real danger in pigeonholing people, and that is that you could be missing out on real untapped skills. And this goes deeper than just having Bob tackle an engineering task, for example. If you were to pair Bob the machinist with Jane, who has her master's in in mechanical engineering, you might be surprised at what happens. Bob is very likely going to tackle a mechanical engineering challenge from a very different perspective. He's going to tackle that challenge from the perspective of a machinist who actually has to build these parts, whereas Jane's going to look at it from maybe traditional engineering perspectives. Both perspectives are important. You got to have both, but both together are really bigger than their sum. And I think we see this a lot in almost any environment. I mean, whether it's a manufacturing environment or electronic engineering or mechanical engineering, whether it's in a strictly sales sales position or a transactional, banking or service type positions, is we think that because this person has this title of this, that's their entire skill set. That's all they got. And when they try to branch out, sometimes they're kind of tamped down because there's this idea that they don't have that skill set because that's not their title. And I think there's a real danger in pigeonholing people like that.
Yeah, and I think, teams are important because, I think you have a team, and teams have discrete purposes within the framework of that. And many times you have extremely cross-functional teams in organizations. And yeah, you can pigeonhole people and say, well, that person is responsible for this piece of it. And oftentimes people that aren't responsible for that piece of it will have suggestions that just aren't honored that well. And if you don't do that, if you don't honor them, they're going to stop giving you those suggestions eventually. Right. And even if, let's say 5 of them are, all right, let's just use the word stupid. I mean, I've come up with a few stupid ideas in my time. That 6th one may really be useful. I mean, but if you don't work through the ideas that aren't quite as good, it's not that dissimilar to what we just talked about.
I was just going to say this.
Talking about. Yeah. Where if you don't work through those things and get to the higher value ideas and keep on encouraging people to bring them to you, you're going to lose out on that. You don't know what you're even losing out on until you lose out on it. So, you really should encourage that free exchange of that from whatever a person's title is. It doesn't matter if you're an engineer or designer. The great idea is a great idea.
Right.
And like I say, Apple, we just talked about Apple in the previous story too. I mean, they were masters at this. And you talk about arrogant thinking. I mean, they were super arrogant. But they also evolved as time went along based on feedback from, I'm sure, from a lot of engineers and designers and salespeople and customer service people and customers.
Right.
Customers are important in this too.
Oh, sure.
They're ones that have a lot of great feedback also going into this kind of thing. So
interesting how those 2 articles actually kind of dovetail.
We didn't think about that, but they did.
You've got to encourage your employees to be able to present their ideas, even if those ideas are, let's say, outside their traditional role within the company. And this gets back, cross-functional teams. We actually haven't talked about cross-functional teams in a long time, but actually that's kind of the idea behind that, is if you've got a challenge, and maybe it's an engineering challenge, that's fine. You bring people in from all parts of the company, and they're going to have a perspective on this that just the engineer or the designer, those 2 people or those 2 groups, may not have the same perspective as the machinist, as the secretary from the front office who might be wanting to use that type of product. Maybe it's a consumer product, that sort of thing. And the more people you get involved in that design, then the more perspectives you get. And you might have to chuck a bunch of them. They may not make sense, but there may be some nugget in there where the engineer and the designer are going to go, oh, wow, yeah, we didn't think about that kind of usability issue, for instance.
Right. Yeah, very, very important to do that. And great organizations are kind of do this in their DNA, in their culture. But many of the others really need to kind of think about this kind of thing too.
Yep.